Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing pushback from the state's largest utility from claims that a new law amounts to a natural gas ban. A new ranking showing Washington is the worst state in the nation to start a business. A preview of what's going to be one of the largest cost increases in the country for Washington car owners. And a new push to roll back the high cost of getting that late-night taco delivered to your apartment in Seattle. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Let's jump into the headlines. Washington's largest utility is pushing back against claims that a new law will effectively ban the use of natural gas in homes across the state. It passed late one night last month and was signed into law by Governor Jay Inslee as schools let out for the holiday weekend. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell covered this statement of refute. TJ, what is PSE saying this bill really does?
They're arguing that it's mostly a planning bill, so it's consolidating their electric and their natural gas planning that they have to do through a state commission.
The claim is that this isn't banning natural gas, which it seems at this point almost everybody outside of PSE and legislative supporters of the bill were saying that they're simply saying that this does eventually ban natural gas. It's not an overnight shut off the hose. It's that this will lead to all homes in the state that aren't, long-term grandfathered in, simply saying you have to go electric.
Yeah, because in the original bill, that was what it was going to do, is it would explicitly ban natural gas for future customers. And then there was another version of the bill, this session, that would have allowed them to end. They would have removed their legal obligation to serve existing customers who want natural gas. And so that stuff was removed from the bill before it was signed by Governor Jay Inslee. Now, the question is whether there's a natural gas ban explicitly or implicitly. Is it a de facto or formal ban? And what's interesting is that it acknowledges that there's a separate state law that requires their energy portfolio be 80% non-emitting sources by 2030 and 100% by 2045.
Right. So in reality, this is like the last move of this long chess game to pull natural gas from homes in the state moving forward, considering the, quote, what they say, aggressive climate goals you got in your story that Governor Inslee and lawmakers have set.
Yes. So what's interesting about that is it is effectively saying that the 2019 state law banned natural gas. But it's not saying it's not saying it explicitly. They're not coming out and saying this bill isn't banning natural gas. That law is banning natural gas. And so what they're not saying is that in the future, people are going to be able to get natural gas. That's there's what they're saying and there's what they're not saying. They're saying that this new law doesn't ban natural gas, but they're not arguing that there's not going to be any impact to future or existing customers' natural gas service.
I love this because in 2019, as you go back and read the archives, you see that at that time, they say this bill does not ban natural gas. That could happen in the future with a future plan we would set forward. But this bill itself does not ban natural gas. And then fast forward to 2024, they are now setting the game plan and they say, well, this is not banning natural gas in homes. That 2019 law did. So which is it? And I feel like this is a game at this point that, well, it's not really this. That could come forward. But then once we come forward, well, this doesn't really do it. What happened back then actually did. Does that feel kind of like a shell game to you, TJ?
It's a shell game of who's going to be held accountable or responsible in the end for when customers either can't get natural gas or when PSC says, hey, we're discontinuing service and we have to do this because of a state law. And it frankly reminds me of when the tolls were put on the HOV lanes on 405 back in 2014. The argument by many state officials is that they had to do it in order to comply with the federal law regarding the average mile speed in those lanes. Well, they ended up not meeting those speed requirements, and yet the tolls remained.
So you're saying this is kind of just a push for PSC to kind of hand off this hot potato of outrage away from the utility once they actually start refusing residents access to natural gas to heat their homes.
Yeah, they're not going to say, hey, we decided that we're going to discontinue your service. They're very likely to say, hey, we have to do this in order to comply with the law. Go talk to lawmakers. And then lawmakers are going to say, hey, we didn't ban natural gas. There's no ban. Show me where it says that natural gas is banned in the law. And it's actually the same argument that's being used by the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the State Building Code Council, which created or voted in favor of a new code. And it doesn't explicitly ban natural gas like it was originally going to by requiring heat pumps in new residential and commercial buildings. What it does is it makes the requirements to use natural gas so incredibly high that it's just not practical. So
right.
Critics and plaintiffs are arguing that it's a de facto ban on natural gas.
Yeah, we're not banning natural gas. We're just going to make it so cost prohibitive that doing so does not make sense economically. And we have a state requirement that the utility that gives you natural gas must be, 80% by some year, natural, not, renewable energy, and then 100% renewable energy by 2040 or something like that, right?
Yeah. So 100% non-emitting energy sources by 2045. But the issue is define non-emitting. That's the question in the state law. And that was actually a discussion that was being had in 2019 is what constituted, clean energy. So it would seem like natural gas would not be part of that. So by 2045, they are not going to be able to have any. And I think PSC in its fact sheet pretty much said that is that natural gas is not going to be part of our portfolio. It's not going to be, it's not going to be provided, which means by 2045, a lot of people in the Puget Sound area and in Washington State overall are going to have to convert their natural gas appliances and heating sources into electric.
And just take the cost at that point, which is at that point, we didn't say we're going to do it, but we said someone else has to do it. So it's not really our fault. Pay up, I suppose.
Well, by the time they have to do that in 10, 15 years, the people who made the decisions are likely not going to be around to implement the policies.
Sure. Right. Thank you, TJ. Appreciate it. We will keep you updated on this story. Moving on. Why is it so expensive and difficult to start and operate a business in the state of Washington? So much so that a new comparison of state business climates have it as the worst in the nation to start a business. State editor Brett Davis wrote this one. How did this survey find Washington of all states in last place?
Well, Eaton Venture Services, which is an Austin, Texas-based financial planner, they analyzed data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics to find the number of business deaths, which sounds really violent, or establishment deaths recorded in June 2022 in each state and weighed those figures against the population to determine its rankings. Washington ranked dead last out of all 50 states with just under 542 business deaths per 100,000 people.
In terms of a business death, meaning a small, a startup business or a business entity of any kind, going insolvent, closing or merging. I mean, I guess there could be a lot of different business deaths that you could, realize. So I suppose that there might be some sort of tangential context to that. But I mean, I guess all states would have those same situations where, say a business is absorbed into another. I wonder if that counts as a business death, or say, a business gets split up into multiple, thus technically dissolving and finding itself as different entities. So, but it struck me as odd when I found Washington at the top of that, because you would think that having no state income tax, which many business owners utilize as what they refer to as a pass-through entity to file taxes under, would have at least pushed it past other states like California and New York. I mean, California's even a pass-through entity on a year's gross income would end up paying 13% if their gross profits are high enough, minus deductions, and New York for giving local job creators a leg up.
So according to this survey, California, they came in at number 46 with nearly 360 establishment deaths per 100,000 people. And New York came in at 45 with just over 375 establishment deaths per 100,000 people. Washington State, as you mentioned, doesn't have a general income tax, but it does have a host of other taxes and regulatory burdens that get placed on businesses. Things like the highest minimum wage in the country at $16.28 an hour. A business and occupation tax, which is a gross receipts tax that basically equates to a more than 15% corporate income tax. Workers' compensation taxes that are about 33% higher than the national average. Unemployment insurance maximum weekly benefits and tax rates that are among the highest in the country. And of course, mandated paid sick leave. And then Washington State also has something else that no other state has. It has a long-term care benefit plan. WellCares, which is the name of the program. It's supported by a premium paid by employees, about 0.58% of each paycheck.
So those seem to be amounting to labor-friendly laws, I guess you would call them, like WellCares especially. In other states, if I'm a business owner and I'm looking at the cost of doing business, having to if I have a labor-intensive business that might not be high margin, say a service industry business, restaurants, bars, those are notoriously low margins. They operate on razor thin profits, quarter to quarter, year to year. This makes Washington stand out in that regard, regardless of the no income tax, right?
Correct. So I reached out to Patrick Connor. He's the Washington State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business for his take on Washington's last place finish in this particular study. He pointed out that while the state has made some progress on state and municipal business licensing fees, Washington, its tax and regulatory obligations essentially place a crushing burden on small businesses. The phrase he used was, Washington State is a graveyard for startup small businesses. So.
I'm curious because businesses, a lot of businesses, if I'm a machinist, for instance, I've got thousands of pounds of machinery. I've got workers in that spot. I'm very rooted. But Washington has over the years evolved into a more technology based and cloud based and software based economy with monster tech companies in the Puget Sound area that don't necessarily have the factory cranking out widgets that would be a representation of a massive cost to move. I wonder with these new laws that are relatively new, right? I mean, WellCares is not a very old law. No. Nope. I wonder about business migration in that regard. And because a business owner and a business that is largely, intangible, with a lot of technology and cloud work, you're operating off of office spaces. You've already outsourced much of your technology manufacturing to other states, if not countries. It makes me wonder, too, with all of these burdens, how often you see a business owner, an employer, a job creator in Washington say, well, you know what? Maybe it just makes more sense to even cross the border to Oregon, of all places. Brett, we'll look into that. It's getting really expensive to own a car in Washington. From tolls spiking to the highest price of fuel in the nation, commuters are feeling the hit to their bank accounts every time they hit the road nowadays. But there's another spike in the cost of car ownership that's going to hit vehicle owners, even if they never pull their cars out of their driveway. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson joins us with yet another shot to the pocketbook. Carlene, tell us about this.
If you are like many people and don't check your bank account as frequently as you should or have auto pay for your car insurance, maybe you didn't notice, but your rates went up an average of 25% in 2023 in the state of Washington. And now we're going up another 18% in 2024. Basically, the last 2 years give us the highest increase percentage of any state. There we go again, making another top of the list.
Yeah, it's a theme today on rankings. The state does not want to find itself. And these are just, to be clear, these are the premiums. So this isn't necessarily a situation where I get into a car accident in Seattle and I have to pay, a portion of it. This is just the normal, this is what comes out of your your account as the normal rate pay to keep your car insured, correct?
Absolutely. And regardless of whether you've, had 0 tickets for several years, 0 at-fault accidents, any other claims on your policy, these are flat rates, 25% on average last year, 18% again this year. And it's, for folks that are living right on the edge, as many of us are because of all the other increased costs, like you mentioned, fuel costs and just inflation in general. That's a significant hit. And a lot of people are shopping around to see if they can find a better rate. But on average, every policy, no matter who you're insured through, is going way up again this year.
Right. Well, and the other option is to just drive uninsured, which is, it is an option, as many people do. And then all of a sudden you are the driver who has your own insurance. And then you get hit by an uninsured driver. And then who covers that cost? The person that has the insurance. Right. Now, Carlene, you spoke to state officials. What did they make of this as terms of why the state's drivers are seeing such a pronounced increase?
Yeah, a couple of factors. One is rate increases that normally will tick up, 2-3% a year, maybe something like that. Some years even hold flat. Nothing really moved at all during the pandemic. Now, the state office of the insurance commissioner, the spokesman there I chatted with, he said, well, we didn't really tell the insurance companies you can't raise rates, but it sounds like there was a general understanding. Everything's kind of on pause because of how desperate, people's finances were and so many people out of work and then a lot of people weren't driving, frankly. One of the major contributing factors, and anybody who drives on the roads of the state of Washington sees it all the time, traffic crashes. Fatality and serious injury collisions have been at 30-year highs for the last 2 years. And just last month, we got confirmed data. Now, it might fluctuate person or two, but according to the Washington Traffic Safety Commission, 772 people were killed in crashes in 2023. And that was up from the 30-year high the year before of 745 people. So that's not even crashes that resulted in serious injury, right? Now, right. And what's interesting too, Cole, they told me that the Traffic Safety Commission said total crashes were down. The number of total crashes was down, and yet more people were killed and seriously injured. Every one of those is going to be a big payout from your insurance company, and they're going to make up for it. That's one of the main factors.
And they said the cost of repairing cars because of supply chain issues as well. And I mean, but those are across the country. And nationally, you see fatal crashes going up everywhere. So it's not just happening in a vacuum in Washington. But more importantly, when any insurance company, like you mentioned, sees across the board increase in payouts, like with these fatal car crashes, the burden is spread out over all customers. It's the same as floods in places like Florida, Louisiana. I'm not in a floodplain, but my insurance goes up in the state anyway because the marketplace becomes more expensive to do it. Now, Carlene, you've previously reported at length on Washington State seeing some of the highest rates in car thefts, fueled by, what amounts to lax law enforcement laws, saying, like the pursuit law, where police cannot chase these people, even under situations like grand larceny, and catch and release policies from progressive prosecutors. Did the state official give any indication that this is an effect of those policies as well?
We did not get into that, but I can tell you anecdotally, several of the lawmakers during this past legislative session that wrapped up last month that have been working on changing it to give police more discretion, right, in pursuit. And we were able to pass that one initiative here that will give them some more discretion in police pursuits. Absolutely. There's no question in discussions with them that would impact, our car insurance rates. Because you find me somebody on my street that hasn't had a car stolen or knows somebody whose car was stolen. And, there's a cost in that, right? For either replacing the car or fixing the damage if it's recovered. There's no question that those, more lax pursuit rules or restrictions, I should say more restrictions on policing and pursuit rules have, contributed to far greater car theft rates. My neighbor's car was stolen just 2 houses down from me last year, and they did get it back completely gutted. Oh,
sure.
It was a Kia, thanks Kia boys, and those cars continue to be stolen at higher rates because of TikTok and whatever telling people how to do that. But there's no question that some of those, restrictions and policing have contributed to those rates being higher for all of us.
We'll dig in a little bit more on that in a future story, but thank you so much, Carlene. We'll have more on that. The Center Square has also stuck with a story about Seattle's new app-based worker pay increases for months, showing a well-intentioned ordinance having resulted in some unintended consequences. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly has a new chapter in this saga, but before we dig into the latest, Spencer, give listeners a quick rundown of what this ordinance did.
Basically, this ordinance created a minimum payment requirement. This requires network companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats to pay the greater of a minimum per minute amount of 44 cents and a minimum per mile amount of 74 cents. This basically translates into a minimum per offer amount of $5 for couriers and delivery drivers who deliver foods through these apps.
Now, you tried it. Once this thing went into effect, you ordered some food, had it brought up to your place. How much more did an order cost you?
That was the last time I did it, too, and it went from a $20 order to about $60. Now,
holy cow.
I tried it earlier today just to see before this call. A breakfast sandwich at McDonald's. It's a reasonably cheap place, maybe not so much nowadays, but it was a $10.60 order. And at checkout, it tacked on $9.91 in fees and taxes, including a $5, quote, regulatory response fee that DoorDash put in retaliation of this ordinance. So in total, my $10 order went to over $20.
You're essentially doubling the cost of a reasonably priced order, regardless of the size of the order.
Exactly.
Now, companies confirmed that customers weren't happy with the new and higher price tag. You went and hit the streets after this, and you talked to some delivery drivers. They should have been pleased with the higher pay, right? But you found that a lot of them were not happy.
They're not happy at all because they're not receiving any orders. One of the delivery drivers I talked to said they spent 3 hours before they finally got one order. And, this ordinance doesn't really help in that regard because you're not getting the money, because you're not getting the orders. They don't blame, customers, but they relied heavily on this form of income. And some of them are saying, we're close to being homeless because we can't afford, to pay our bills based on this, lack of income we're getting.
Now that no one's happy, we're now seeing rumblings in the city council that they could make some tweaks and possibly walk this back.
Mm-hmm. So on Monday during a city council briefing, Seattle City Council member Sarah Nelson announced that she is in the works of putting out together legislation that would change the law from a per order payment to a pay period. Basically, what the main thing is that this isn't a rollback of the ordinance. Instead, she emphasized that they're going to keep the minimum wage requirement. Now, once this legislation comes together, we'll have to see, if DoorDash and Uber Eats are going to say, fine, that works. We'll get rid of this $5 fee that they implemented once this law went into, it went into action back in January.
These businesses, these local businesses have, in some situations, retooled their entire model to be a delivery-only service, where they, maybe they leased a smaller place because they knew they weren't going to get the foot traffic, but they knew that they could rely on Uber Eats and these other app-based services to still get their food out, and then made sure that that was how they were going to make their living. And this ordinance turned that entirely on its head. Well, this is a fascinating experience of lawmakers and city officials trying to walk back a policy they put forward, but we will follow this one till the end. Thank you, Spencer, and a thank you to all of our journalists for sharing their stories today. Stay up to date with all of these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.